Welcome to everyone to this presentation. We're going to talk about hypertrophy and how we apply it. So with us today we have Cahill, who looks after all of our communications and our social media marketing. So Cahill is going to drop you guys a survey leaving the end of the presentation. So it would be fantastic if you could fill that out for us, just so we can get feedback on what we're doing and we can assess and look at what people want to hear and what they want us to review moving forward. Secondly, then we have Dave Downey, who is the UK Education Manager. He's going to help me through the presentation and he's going to help us with questions and stuff that we have at the end. So I think what we might do is drop the questions into the question box, and then Dave can ask me them and we'll talk through them at the very end. So we've delivered a couple of presentations on hypertrophy, and the focus has always been on, I suppose, someone who has a very kind of a low training age, or what you would do starting out with someone when you're focusing on hypertrophy in terms of building the foundation of the pyramid. So we always, I suppose, compare human beings and their performance to a pyramid, and the top of the pyramid being the top of their performance or their performance capacity. And in order to make them bigger, you want to make the base of that pyramid wider in order to elevate their performance. So we've always talked about the very foundational layer of hypertrophy and how we approach that with novice, I suppose, clients and athletes that we would work with. But what we're going to do today is we are going to work, we're going to work our way through a situation, a real life situation that is probably slightly more advanced in terms of the hypertrophy. So we are going to start breaking down time and attention, reps and set schemes that we can use, and we're going to look at how we apply that to someone in this situation. I've done it on some of the athletes that we work with in their off season, but again, this can be applied into many different contexts, as whether you're someone from the general population or athletic population. It would just require someone to have a slightly higher training age. Okay, so it's slightly more advanced in terms of the application of science that we're looking at and the systems and methods that we're talking about in terms of how we actually apply that. So the content we're going to cover is, we're going to look at what hypertrophy is. We're going to look at the science behind building muscle, what those components look like. We're going to look at progressive overload. We're going to look at training to failure, and is that necessary in order to induce a hypertrophic response. Reps and reserve, different training systems we can use, loading protocols that are available to us. Then we're going to look at some guidelines around programming. I'm going to touch on the deload week and what a deload week actually looks like. I don't think we get to actually analyze that much. We always kind of, it's not as important when the training age is low, but especially as you move up the ladder and the client or athlete you're working with is more advanced, we need to pay more attention to the actual deload week. We're going to look at what our program template looks like, and then some conditioning options at the end of the program. So, like I said, this presentation was built around some of the athletes that we work with in their off season. The off season is the time of year where your body and your mind can recalibrate and refocus. With formal team sessions, normally a couple of months away, this is a perfect opportunity to dedicate some time and develop just one physical quality that you want to prioritize. So if you think about what goes on in season for athletes, they're trying to develop multiple physical qualities, and in their off season, they get to focus on developing just one physical quality. Like a dimmer light switch, by prioritizing your energy on one physical quality, you can provide the maximum tolerable dose required in order to develop the desired training adaptation. Although other physical qualities aren't prioritized during this training phase, they are still programmed in micro doses or small energy supply operating in the background. This is to ensure that you minimize risk of injury and don't blow a fuse for when more moderate doses are reintroduced into your pre-season training. So let's look at what is hypertrophy. So hypertrophy is the ability to increase the size of a muscle, as we all know. It occurs following an overload stimulus when protein synthesis exceeds protein breakdown. So physiologically, we need protein synthesis to exceed protein breakdown. Now, there's two types of hypertrophy that we need to focus on: functional and non-functional. The non-functional hypertrophy that we focus on is sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, and this is also known as the pump, and it occurs when there's an increase in non-contractile elements and fluid within the muscle fibers. So if we think about doing high repetitions in something like a bicep curl, 10, 12, 15 reps, what happens is we drive a non-contractile fluid into the sacromeres of the muscle, and it drags in things like lactate and phosphate into the muscle, and that's what we refer to as sarcoplasmic. The muscle itself does not functionally become stronger, okay? So that's why it's referred to as non-functional hypertrophy. Then we have myofibrillar hypertrophy, and this occurs when myofibrils split and multiply to form what's called two daughter cells. So we expose the muscle to mechanical stress, and as a result, the muscle fiber becomes thicker, so it becomes stronger. And as it becomes thicker, it splits into two daughter cells, and the same process happens over and over again. And due to the muscle becoming thicker, it's able to deal with more load, and that's why we refer to it as functional hypertrophy. However, although sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is an acute response and swelling of muscle fibers post-training, it initiates a process that stimulates a very anabolic environment. Hence the reason why we don't dismiss sarcoplasmic hypertrophy or the pump, which is induced by higher repetitions. Hence the reason why we don't dismiss that when we're talking about developing the optimal environment for hypertrophy. Okay, so taking a look at how we actually go and we build myofibrillar or sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, how we induce those responses within the body. The following factors are responsible for splitting myofibrils so that they can increase the number of cells within a muscle fiber. So first we have mechanical tension. So mechanical tension produced by force generation and stretch, which is load, okay? So you need a heavy load if you want to induce mechanical tension. So if you think about an advanced lifter, if you're going to induce if you're going to give them a heavy mechanical load, you're going to have to give them strength type training, so reps of 1 to 6. Then we have metabolic stress, and this is the accumulation of metabols or swelling within the muscle, like we talked about the pump. In order to induce metabolic stress, we've got to give them rep ranges of about 8 up as far as 15. And these two components combined, mechanical tension and metabolic stress, create what's called muscle damage. And damage to the muscle fibers are potentially an important driver of a hypertrophic response. So with us knowing this much information, or looking at, I suppose, the strength and hypertrophy spectrum in terms of rep ranges, we can now make a very strong, we can clearly identify that we need rep ranges from the low rep ranges, 1 to 6, up as far as the high rep ranges, kind of 10 to 15 in order to induce the optimal environment for hypertrophy to happen. One of the most important things that we need to focus on as we go through the physiological process of trying to develop hypertrophy is we need to look at progressive overload. Progressive overload is the training principle of placing more stress on the system over time. With specific relation to muscle hypertrophy, we are looking to increase the tension on the muscle over time. So we've always got to be thinking progressive overload. And there are many, many ways in which we can, I suppose, provide progressive overload to our clients. We can either increase the load lifted, we can increase the reps. So we can go, so if we look at the load, first of all, in a bench press, we can go from 100 kilos to 110 kilos. That's increased load. We can increase the rep range. We can go from 10 repetitions on the bench press one week to 12 repetitions on the bench press the next week. We can increase the amount of sets that we're giving to people that we work with. So we can go from 3 sets to 4 sets. That's progressive overload. We can improve the technique or form. So we can look at the biomechanical aspect of the lift and we can improve that. And as a result, we'll be able to progressively overload how the muscle is able to deal with that load over time. You potentially could increase the range of movement, okay? And by increasing the range of movement, you will, you will potentially require more of the motor units to kick in and more of the muscle itself to actually be activated in order to perform the movements. You can also utilize a technique called reps in reserve. And we're going to cover that in detail later on in the program, but that is not training to failure and leaving somewhere between 1 to 2 reps in reserve when you're lifting. We can decrease what's called rate of perceived exertion. So if we do a subjective measurement and ask people how hard the session is this week, you know, it's a 7 this week, we can make sure the same session is a 7.5 or an 8 next week. And then finally, we can decrease the rest period between our reps and sets, between our sets, in terms of going from 60 seconds down to 45 seconds over time. So some methods may be appropriate, more appropriate than other methods. And in some situations, adding reps beyond 5 in a strength phase will be less appropriate than increasing the load. So we have to be thinking. Remember what we said at the start? In order to induce hypertrophy, we need to use the full spectrum, the full strength spectrum, and utilize reps from 1 to 6, as well as reps from kind of, 8 to 12 or 8 to 15. So, performing strength or focusing on strength is still developing myofibrillar type hypertrophy. And as a result, we just need to be careful on the progressive overload method that we pick when we're working with people, and that it suits the program. Okay, so let's look at training to failure. Is training to failure necessary? Training to failure is not necessary, and if implemented too regularly, is actually more likely to reduce overall performance in the weight room. As you approach failure, the fatigue you accumulate increases. By hitting failure, any subsequent set will be negatively impacted. So if you go to failure in your first set, your second and third set are going to be impacted in terms of how much weight you can lift. However, as we approach failure, our reps also provide us with a greater hypertrophic stimulus as a result of increased motor unit recruitment and increased time under tension. So that is the last 5 reps of our sets tends to be where the body puts itself into the best or most optimal environment to develop hypertrophy. The final 5 repetitions before failure may be considered the hypertrophic reps or effective reps as a result of their increased hypertrophic stimuli. However, unlike unlike the raise in fatigue, the hypertrophic stimulus increases more linearly. Therefore, doesn't it make sense to train where our stimulus is higher and the fatigue is lower? This is called our stimulus to fatigue ratio. So we need to go into we need to train in a fatigue state. We need to get into those last 5 reps, but it's very, very important that we don't burn ourselves out by just going to, maximum exertion every single set. So now that we understand why training to failure isn't optimal, of course, training too far from failure isn't optimal either. If that was the case, muscle hypertrophy would be easy. And remember, the final 5 reps before failure provide the most hypertrophy. We need to find the point where the stimulus is high, whilst fatigue is relatively low, or we can tolerate the fatigue. And we do this with a method called reps in reserve. Reps in reserve is the number of reps that could be complete before momentary muscular failure occurs in a working set. For example, take a 10 repetition bench press. You do your 10 reps and you go for the 11th rep. The bar doesn't come back up on the 11th rep. That would mean the 10th rep was 0 reps in reserve. So when you got to 10, you had 0 reps in reserve. However, if you stopped at 8 and you still had 2 reps left in the tank, you are stopping the set at 2 reps in reserve. So I hope that makes sense to everyone. So just go over that one more time so that's clear and so you understand that when we get to the programming element of what we're doing. So if you had a 10 repetition max bench press and you did your 10th rep and you went for your 11th rep and the bar doesn't come back up, that means the 10th rep was 0 reps in reserve. If you stopped at 8 reps, you still have 2 reps left. You are stopping the set at 2 reps in reserve. By using your reps in reserve, we can accumulate more total volume and therefore increase mechanical tension, which is the primary driver of hypertrophy. Okay, and then over time, we can effectively monitor progress and we can effectively manage fatigue if we take this approach, which is reps in reserve. Okay, let's look at the training system now that we're going to introduce to this person over the 15 weeks. So the program is going to be split into 3 blocks of 5 weeks, which each block laying the foundation for the next one. So this is called phase potentiation. So each phase is potentiating the body to deal with the next phase of training that's coming. So on our first block, which lasts from week 1 to 5, we're trying to build a good base. And the aim is to slow down the reps during the eccentric portion of the lift and control the tempo so that we can enhance muscle-mind connection and improve on the technical aspect of the lift. That is the focus over the first 5 weeks, okay? Very simple focus, working on the eccentric part of the lift. The second block, we're going to look at metabolic overload. And during this block, we introduce things like drop sets to increase the metabolic stress and the total reps that we're providing to the athletes. And then finally, over the last block, we're going to look at really pumping up the volume. And we increase increase what's called training volume. So there will be an additional set added to the primary exercise, as well as the introduction of what's called density training. So we're going to look at how we apply density training into a program. Okay, block 1. What are we focusing on block 1? So the aim, lock down the technique, create a strong mind-muscle connection. To lock down technique and create a strong mind-muscle connection, we will be focusing on and slowing down the eccentric portion of the exercise. The eccentric portion of an exercise is the portion where the muscle is lengthening under tension. We will utilize strict rep tempo throughout the lift. This is explained in the how to read part of this presentation, which I'll bring you to in a moment. By focusing on technique and creating a strong mind to muscle connection, we maximize the return on investment from every rep that we do, and we improve what's called time under tension and maximize potential loss of gains. So in block 2, we're focusing on what's called metabolic overload to increase metabolic stress and total training volume. When we're looking at how to induce metabolic stress, metabolic stress is produced via muscle contractions. So that's how, so we need a lot of muscle contractions in order to produce metabolic stress. And the easiest way to do that is through high reps and a high number of sets. So if you look at metabolic accumulation, is very strongly correlated with muscle hypertrophy. As we know, high repetitions induces hypertrophy. One method of inducing metabolic accumulation is drop sets. Drop sets involves performing a set before dropping the weight by roughly 20 to 25% and repeating the same movement at a lighter weight. During this block, which is block 2, week 6 to 10, we will focus on triple drop sets on the final of our working sets on selected movements. So an example of a drop set, guys, in case we don't know, if we're doing 12 reps of 20 kilos on a bicep curl, once we complete our set, we reduce the weight by 20%. So we take off 4 kilos, we do another 12 reps at 16 kilos, reduce the weight again by 20%, which is another kind of 3 kilos, 3 to 4 kilos. We perform again 12 reps and reduce the weight again by another 20%, which is roughly another 2 to 3 kilos. And we perform the last number of reps, which is 12 reps. So that is how you would perform a drop set. Finally, we have block 3, where we're looking at mass volume through the program to induce the most hypertrophy we can. So the aim is to increase total weekly volume per muscle group towards maximum recoverable volume. The final block's aim is to increase the total volume of each muscle group. This will be implemented by increasing the number of working sets in the primary movement or muscle group from 4 sets to 5 sets. The final series of exercises per session will include some what's called density training. In EDT, which is density training, is a time cap training period where the aim is to get as much work or rounds in as possible. And we're going to go through this in the program. Each week, 1 minute is added to the circuit type training, which will increase work complete. By now, you will likely have increased your work capacity as a result of the previous 2 blocks of training, and therefore tolerance to new training volume may be improved. This 4-week block should change your recovery capacity as a result of the increase in volume. So what we mean by this, guys, to flesh this out, if we look down here, so if we take 2 exercises, okay, so an incline bench press and an RDL, so an upper body and a lower body. On week 1, when we're talking about the escalating density training, we would perform an incline bench press, and then straight away we would go and perform an RDL, and we would keep performing these 2 exercises back to back for 5 minutes. That's on week 1. On week 2, we would still perform the 2 exercises back to back in a circuit for 6 minutes. Then week 3, 7 minutes, week 4, 8 minutes, week 5, 9 minutes. This is what's referred to as density training, and you're building up someone's their GPP, or their ability to work under fatigue for a prolonged period of time. Now, obviously, if we think about, we've got to be careful here with the reps in reserve. The weight has got to be light enough where it can be utilized in a circuit type session. Like, we can't do, 2 sets of this, superset of 2 sets of this, and then burn ourselves out. We've got to pick a weight where we can perform it for a huge amount of time, 9 minutes. And if you guys are working with clients or athletes who perform in events or sports, this is a really great way to increase their capacity and their ability to perform under fatigue for a prolonged period of time. Okay, lastly, before we get to the program, we have to look at some different loading protocols. So there's 2 main loading protocols that we can focus on when we're trying to develop hypertrophy. And remember, back to the start of the presentation, we need to utilize reps from 1 to 6, as well as reps from 6 up as far as 15 when we're developing hypertrophy. So we need to bring in strength type training as well as higher repetition training. So if we look at block 1, what are we trying to achieve during block 1? We want to adapt to conservative volume at a set load in order to develop good technique. Loading increments across week 1 to 5 are only allowed once you keep 1 to 2 reps in reserve. So we do what's called a plateau load, where we ask the athlete or the client to perform the same reps and the same load lifted for all of the prescribed sets. Okay, that's what we're doing in block 1. In block 2, we're still doing a plateau load, but we're going to increase the volume by adding more working sets across weeks 6 to 10. This increases work capacity and muscle density, laying a foundation in preparation for heavier loads to be tolerated in the final block. So you can see the increase, if you look at the bottom of the screen here, in terms of total tonnage lifted, by the end, and we're only taking into consideration here the primary lift, guys, but if you look at the total tonnage lifted, it's 4,140 kgs, okay? And over here, it's half that, it's 2,070. So straight away there's a massive increase in training volume. And what's really important, guys, when we're using plateau load, and it tends to be used in the early stages of preparation when we're working with people, we're asking them to lift a certain percentage of their 1RM, and we're asking them to repeat that without any incremental increases in weight over the set number of sets that we're prescribing. Yeah. So as you can see here, 6 reps at 77% of their 1RM, and that weight does not change over the 6 reps. That's called plateau loading. Now, when we go to step loading, what happens is we are asking the individual to increase the percentage of their 1RM that they lift over the duration of the prescribed sets. So set 1 would be 50%, set 2 would be 66%, and so on and so forth, right up until the last set, which is 90%. Now, why would you pick a step load over a plateau load? Well, step loading is normally associated with strength type training. So we want to remember, we want to get stronger at the set or the prescribed number of reps that we're giving. So we would slowly increase the load over the duration of that set so we can induce mechanical tension. So in block 3, we would transition to a step loading protocol with a linear increase in intensity of loading during each working set and each week, whilst keeping 1 to 2 reps in reserve to minimize our central nervous system fatigue. Okay, let's look at the actual program. So our program is made up of 3 different sections. It's made up of it is the PAA system. And it's made up of a primary exercise, which is the main lift selected to improve your force output. It requires the highest amount of motor unit recruitment and has the biggest transfer of training effect. Then we have the assistance exercises. These target specific areas of weaknesses so that you can tolerate greater stress and more load the next time you go back to the primary lift. And then finally, we have the accessory phase of the program. And this is where we can develop hypertrophy, okay, as we traditionally know it, in terms of higher repetitions, which in turn helps improve our strength capacity and improves imbalances by increasing endurance capacity of specific stabilizer muscles, or reduces our injury to risk over time. So that's what they're the principles we follow when we're doing exercise selection for the programming. We would never put a bicep curl as a primary exercise, because that will not improve our force output. We're always picking big compound exercises for the primary lifts. So when it comes to the warm-up sets, we perform warm-up sets prior to our main working set, and we do this as many times as we feel necessary until the athlete or client is ready to perform that movement. The rest period then is 2 to 3 minutes between sets of the primary exercise, 1 to 2 minutes between sets of assistance exercise, and somewhere between 30 to 90 seconds between sets of accessory work at the end of our program. All of our exercises then, guys, we keep them on YouTube, because not everyone we program for is with us in a face-to-face capacity. Not only athletes that we program for, we do it online and stuff like that as well, and we can't always get to them. So it's a good tool to have the programs and the exercise that you're prescribing held online for the people that you work with. Okay, let's quickly chat about the download week before we move on to the program. So the download week occurs at the end of each training block. So week 5, week 10, week 15. The deload week is a week where volume is reduced to approximately 50%. That's important, guys. We don't reduce intensity, we just reduce training volume. That's what helps us achieve the deload or download week. The aim of every training session is to provide a stimulus to allow adaptation of physical qualities. However, with this stimulus comes fatigue, as we know. So the deload week provides an opportunity to physically and psychologically recover from the training block and ensure readiness for training, and ensure readiness for the training block to come ahead. A failure to use a deload week will result in an inability to recover from training stimulus and result in, you will get a decrease in performance over time. So fatigue accumulation, looking at decreased training performance, decreased training enjoyment and staleness, and decreased motivation. And I'm sure we've all felt these things. I know I've felt them plenty of times, where I'm just not motivated to train. And that is as a result of fatigue accumulation. Then we have fatigue dissipation. This is where we are able to monitor and manage our fatigue. And we get, when we're able to do that at a very high level, we get improved training performance, increased training enjoyment, and increased motivation. So guys, very important that we understand, fatigue in terms of how it affects what we do on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and block-to-block situation. So during the off season for this particular athlete or group of athletes, we tend to have more flexibility with the days that we select to perform certain sessions. So with that being said, the following guidelines we use to help shape our weekly training structure. We distributed resistance training sessions as evenly as possible throughout the week. If we were performing conditioning sessions, it was preferred to place the sessions on a day that we were not doing resistance training. If performing a conditioning session on resistance days, we tried to keep them the gap as large as possible, So we did resistance training in the morning and conditioning in the evening. So we did that so we didn't have as big an interference effect. With this particular group of athletes, there was a little bit of acceleration and speed mechanical work done, but it was programmed in terms of just the movement mechanics of acceleration, but we did that in the warm-up. And again, we did this to minimize the effect on training. So it was just micro-dosed. We also made sure that we had 1 to 2 low training days or days where they could recover. And at the very bottom here is exactly what the session, the weekly structure actually looked like. So on Monday, we had a resistance training day. On Tuesday, we had a conditioning day where they came in and did some light conditioning work. On Wednesday, we had another resistance training day. On Thursday, we had a conditioning day again. This was optional for the athletes at the time. Friday and Saturday, we had 2 more resistance training day. And then we actually, regardless of what they wanted to do, we made them take a day off on the Sunday. Okay. In terms of the way we set up our programs and built them out was as follows. Each coach, as we know, has their own system of laying out the programs. But what we want to do here is we want to talk about some of the more important components to have within the program so that we know what we should be implementing when we are structuring our program for our clients or athletes. So first of all here, this is where in this box here is where we had, the first box here is how we laid out the exercises in terms of the order we wanted them performed in. So 1, if it has just a number beside it, 1, 2, that means you perform this exercise by itself, all the reps, all the sets, then you move on to the next exercise. If it has letters beside it, so 3A, 3B, 3C, that means these exercises are performed one after another, and that is regarded as 1 set. And then you would go back to the first exercise and start them all over again. In the middle box here, we laid out what we wanted done in terms of plateau loading or step loading. So remember, we talked about the 2 different loading protocols. So do we want them performing the same weight at the same intensity for the exact number of sets, or do we want them incrementally increasing the load they're lifting over the number of prescribed sets? That's what we've detailed in this box here. In the 4th box, we've detailed the amount of rest we want the individual to take for each exercise they perform. And as you can see here, this is more strength orientated at the start, so the rest is higher. But as we go through here, we can see that the rest comes down. Now, there's no rest in this exercise and this exercise because, as you can remember, they are supersetted. The rest only comes once they finish this exercise. We're going to give them 60 to 120 seconds, and then we get them to start the exercise, supersetting or trisetting the exercises all over again. In this box here is the weeks, the order of the weeks, and each week appears in separate rows, not columns. So they know exactly what their training week is. The next column here, which identifies the reps that are prescribed for every week. So you can see, So you can see here that the reps stay the same over the first 4 weeks, okay? At the top here tells you the sets. So how many sets are prescribed for the athlete. We've also clearly identified the deload week here at each stage of the program. And then finally, we've left in some spare boxes to help record any additional information or weight lifted that we think is necessary for the program moving forward. So that's how we structure our our training tools when we prescribe them to people. And again, we know every coach does this slightly differently, but for the purpose of the presentation, we just wanted to show you rationale behind why we do what we do. For every, there's no point in having information in your program if it's not going to add to the client or athlete's understanding of the program. So we just want to show you justification as to why we have what we have in our program. In terms of the warm-up sessions, guys, just before we get into the program, our warm-up sessions would look like something like this: a light little raised phase for a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes on a bike. Then we would have taken the individual off. They would have done something like world's greatest stretch, 6 reps each side, deep squat rotation, 6 reps each side, Bulgarian squats, 10 reps each side, bent over row pull aparts, 10 repetitions, banded overhead press, 10 repetitions, and then a little bit of plyometrics at the end, tall to squat landings on single leg and double leg, followed by then, so that would have been the activation mobilization stuff. Then that will be followed by some potentiation work where they're working submaximally at whatever lift they are until they feel neurologically ready to get into their working sets. So that's what our warm-up would look like generally. Okay, phase 1, day 1, what does it look like? Okay, so like we said here, this is 1. So this exercise is performed by itself. Okay, huge tempo there, guys. 6 seconds on the way down, 2-second pause at the bottom, 1 second on the way up. We have our weeks laid out here. We have our and all of our working sets laid out here as well. Okay, so you can tell on week 4 and week 5 we've increased. On week 5 here we've taken our download. You see how the reduction in training volume is there by 50%. Okay, so that's our primary lift. Our assistance lift then is a T-bar row. So for this particular individual, we mixed upper body and lower body. So, you know, traditionally what you would have seen is like, you know, people would do lower body and people would do upper body, and we do that when we're in season. But just to mix it up for this individual or a group of individuals, what we did was we combined all over body sessions, just something different for them because they're so used to doing either, you know, upper body or lower body by itself. So we did for the primary lift, we did a back squat, and then for the assistance lift, we did a T-bar row, focusing on the hips and the lower back, as well as the upper back. Obviously, you can see the eccentric section of the lift here, with a 1 second pause at the bottom and then 1 second concentrically on the way back up. The weekly reps and sets laid out. And again, deload on week 5. The last 3 exercises, we had a tricep, and again, very straightforward in terms of the reps, sets, how they're laid out, and a bit of a deload there on week 5 again. Again, we've plateau load, so we've asked the individuals to lift the same weight for every single set, and these 3 exercises are supersetted, trisetted should I say, with a the last 2 exercises, there's 2 supersets going on here, guys, apologies. The last 2 exercises are supersetted, and exercise 2 and 3 is supersetted as well, so we have 2 sets of superset in here. Okay, very straightforward, 5 exercises, nothing too complex. We make sure we're getting anterior and posterior work in for all, like so, you know, we have our lower body push, lower body pull, lower body push, lower body pull exercises in there, so there's good structural balance going on, should we say. Okay, day number 2, exact same. We've done an upper body bench press. Then for our primary lift, then we've done a superset for a lat pull down and dumbbell shoulder press. And then we've done some arm work at the end of the program. And again, very straightforward in terms of our reps, our tempos. We're on top of our time under tension, good eccentric phase. We're really working on building time under tension during this program. Okay, And you can see how high the reps are here, trying to induce a lot of metabolic stress in these smaller muscle groups at the very end of the program. Okay, day number 3 of this program. We've done a sumo deadlift, so very posterior chain and lower body orientated exercise. Then we've gone into our assistance work where we've done a dumbbell split squat, supersetted with a dumbbell bench press. Again, anterior chain. We've done some posterior chain for the last 2 supersets at the end of the program. So again, guys, good structural balance, focusing on posterior chain to anterior chain work here. Very important that when we go into the summertime or we prescribe these big hypertrophy blocks, that we don't have an all anterior chain. You're going to cause injury to the people that you work with. So again, big focus on the tempo, big focus on the time, reps and sets all laid out as we have done in the last 2 days. Finally, day 4. Okay, start with the lower body and leg press. We've already kind of deadlifted, we've already squatted. Lower body leg press. Then we've gone into a upper body, we've done chins and dips, supersetted chins and dips. Again, a lot of tempo and control. And then finally, we've done a superset again at the end with dumbbell lateral raise and dumbbell bicep curl. Okay, so that's the end of block 1, guys. Then we're into week 5 here, where we're, taking our download week on week 5. Okay, so right now we're into the second block. Okay, we're into the second block of training. So again, as we can see, guys, we're traditionalists in terms of we don't have too much change going on to the primary lift. We keep focused on having big compound movements in the primary lift. Why? Because they're so technical, they're so hard to do really, really well that we don't want to disturb that. We have a sole focus, which is to improve force output with our primary lift. So we respect the primary lift and we make sure that we keep the same exercises in there over time. So again, a back squat with a huge amount of tempo. Again, reps and sets. Again, adhering to the deload on week 10. T-bar row, the exact same process again with tempo and reps and sets. This time again, we're still with, we've still done a superset here and a superset at the bottom with dumbbell incline press and RDLs. Day 2 of this program, bench press by itself. Performed by itself, guys. Then we've supersetted lat pull down, dumbbell shoulder press, and finally we've supersetted EZ bicep curls and easy bar skull crushers as well. So you can see the increase here in volume, okay, the last couple of sets, and the increase here as well in the number of sets. And even for our primary exercise, guys, we've increased this by 2 reps during this block. Okay, still adhering to reps in reserve, but our capacity or ability to perform the primary exercise in block number 2 should be greater. Okay, day number 4 on phase 2. Again, traditionally sticking with the big compounds like a leg press. We've already sumoed, we've already deadlifted, we've already squatted in the day. So we've introduced back to the leg press here again. The reps have gone up and the sets have gone up as well. Okay, into the last program, the last block of training. So day 1, block 3. Again, not changing the primary lifts, guys. Look, as we can see throughout this block, leg press, sumo deadlift, bench press, back squat, we've kept the same primary lifts all the way through, because like I said, they're so technically hard to perform. We want the guys and girls that we train to be really technically proficient at what they do. What we've changed here, guys, is we've come in, we have our superset here, that's fine on our lower leg day. And then we have, this is where we're getting into our density training. So look, the reps are higher here, okay? For the primary lift, the reps are higher. The reps are higher for our assistance work as well. Now, for the last superset, what we've done here is for 7 minutes, we are going to do dumbbell incline press with RDL, okay? So we do the prescribed reps, which is 12 and 12, and we keep performing those exercises supersetted with no break until we get to 7 minutes. So there's a huge amount of work being performed in that exercise or in that superset over time, and that is density training. And we can see that we increase the amount of time that we density train over the weeks. You know, week 12 goes up by a minute, week 13 goes up by a minute, week 14 goes up by a minute, and then we respect the download week where we bring it back to half again, or nearly half on the last week. We go to the next day 2 again, bench press, higher reps here, guys. Exact same with the superset on lat pull down, dumbbell shoulder press. The reps are higher. Again, the density work at the end. Okay, it's only arms. We understand that, but we're still doing density work with the biceps and tricep work at the end of the program. Okay. And again, on our deadlift day, sumo deadlift, then we superset our dumbbell alternating bench press and our dumbbell split squat. And finally, at the end of the program, back into some real heavy density training, 7 minutes, with that time increasing over the 4 weeks up as far as 10 minutes. So you're building a lot of GPP in here and building huge amounts of work capacity by getting them to work at 7 minutes, lifting a load like that. They'll be really primed once they go back to whatever it is they're required to go back to 2. And again, look, reps have gone up slightly lower in the sumo deadlift. I think they were 12 the day before. No, they're not. They're 10. They're 10 the whole way through on our volume. And then finally onto day 4, which is leg press. You know, again, primary lift, reps higher, superset here with our chins and our dips, 12 repetitions, and then dumbbell hammer curls and dumbbell lateral raise at the end for some density work, right? Okay, so, and again, that time increasing, you know, from 5 to 8 minutes over the 4 days. So that is our program in a nutshell. I hope I've covered everything in terms of, again, there's many different ways to approach this, but I suppose what's important is that this was taken from a live kind of environment, or what we actually prescribed to people that we worked with over before a pre-season in an off-season period of time. So it is specific to this group of individuals. It can be taken and implemented into other people's training. I think, and it's important to just understand that the training age of these people are considerably higher than who we've been pitching to date. In terms of a lot of the presentations that we've built, we've been hyper focused on what you need to do at the very foundational level, which is build endurance, some kind of 8 to 12, 8 to 15, build good neural capacity. Here you can see that we started on week 1, you know, of block 1. We started, the reps were lower. Okay, the time under tension was higher because we had 6 seconds eccentric control, but we were already dealing with strong individuals prior to them going into this. So it's important to just, I suppose, build that context in the background before people start, I suppose, coming to strong assumptions from the content. But that's everything from me. If you guys have any questions, I would love to try and answer them.
Perfect. Thanks, Shane. I might implement that training session block into myself. So one of the questions here, can you put in a deload week if necessary? So like before the 5 week, if your client or team are feeling affected.
Yeah, you can, yeah.
Yeah.
Deload, yeah. So that's just having a good or an astute training eye or training approach to training. I think if you think that your team are suffering from fatigue, get that deload in there for them. I mean, there's many a time we've never ever we sit down and we'll build out a 8-9 month periodization plan. We've very rarely stuck to that plan, exactly stuck to that plan over the whole course of the 8 months. It's all about being able to problem solve. And if one of the problems that you're faced with, which is fatigue, and it's outside the realm of what you have planned for, you've got to be proactive around that and start bringing in deloads to help manage that fatigue.
Yeah. Another question here. So during that density training, so it said there volume city, how do you stop it from like turning into more of a cardio type, like circuit based structure?
You don't. So do you remember at the very start when we said that the focus here is hypertrophy? However, there are other energy systems that automatically get microdosed in the background.
Yeah.
And due to the nature of the training, you will get a small microdose of aerobic work going on in the background, and you can't stop that. But if you think about it, hypertrophy by nature anyway is aerobic, or it's underpinned by the aerobic system. So there's nothing you can do about it to stop it becoming aerobic. But what we're trying to do here is, it's not aerobic traditionally as we would think of aerobic as running. It's inducing, getting people to go into a fatigued state under load, and then perform in that fatigue state with that load over a set period of time, and get them to increase that time that they're performing for. That's the idea of the GPP work at the end of the volume block, which is block 3.
Yeah. And I suppose you're still sticking to those tempos anyway, so it's not like you're speeding the exercises. So you'll still get that structure and technique and stuff as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I just got a question in here. How do you do a dumbbell step up with the tempo that you've described? So so it says there 4-1-1. So we're thinking about the eccentric, so the step down essentially. Is it that would be slow phase?
Exactly. So it's so pause for 1 second at the bottom, and you concentrically drive yourself to the upright position, and then where the eccentric work is, as you're lowering yourself back down, that's where you count 4, 3, 2, 1, and you make sure they have the control when they're coming down. A lot of the time, honestly, even with really strong athletes that I work with, a lot of the time they're not doing that with any real load, especially if you have it after kind of a big compound primary lift, like a back squat. They're just fried. Like, they're working for 6 seconds eccentric load on the back squat there. By the time they get to the step up, they are fried. So don't let it be faster. If you've put down a tempo of 4-1-1, don't let it be faster than that. Just keep reducing weight off of them until they can go through the eccentric component of it for 4 seconds.
Yeah. And if they were still struggling without any load, would you maybe give them maybe a counterbalance weight to hold, or a resistance band to hold to help that eccentric time?
Yeah, I would. And I've even had to go to the stage where we've had to introduce bands hanging from bars to help them, so they can use that as an external source of, you know, resistance on the way down to help them lower themselves down. So they're making sure that they're going through the prescribed eccentric load, whether that be 3, 4, 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Because again, they're just fried, but we need to be putting the muscle in a stress state.
Yeah. I think that exercise done right is one of the best
Yeah.
out there. Cool. Just one more question here. Would you look to potentially add another whole day of exercise into your programming, or would you stick to the progressive overload of sets and reps for people in their exercises?
Sorry, just say that again there, Dave. You just broke up.
When you're talking about hypertrophy and progressive overload, do you see the need to add a whole nother day of programming in, or would you just stick to the progressive overload of sets and reps?
So would I add another training day, or would I add another training day, or would I just add more reps and sets? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
It depends. And I know it depends is a flaky answer, but it depends on a couple of things. Listen, whatever way you want to try and achieve progressive overload, you can do that. There is, what I would say is, concentrate on getting progressive overload achieved in the session, and then you can look at adding another day in. The problem with adding too many days in is, like, you know, you've got to get people to commit to them. So if you set out with 5-6 days training, that's great, but you want to make sure that if you're going to follow this plan that I've talked about here today, you're going to need to make sure that your clients stick to the 15 weeks prescribed in order for them to achieve what we've laid out for them here. So there's no point in adding another day and then not sticking to it. By all means, add another day, 100%, but make sure you're better off going with fewer days and the structure of the session be right in terms of the progressive overload than adding on loads of days in time. Like, I'm going to be honest with you, I think 4 days is 4 or 5, like 4 days is plenty, especially for an athlete. 4 days is definitely plenty for an athlete's resistance. Like, their sport is not being good in the gym. Their sport is being good at whatever sport they're playing, GAA or soccer, rugby, athletics, whatever it is. So remember, the gym is there to accommodate them to be better at what they do. So 4 days in the gym for them is nuts. Is more than enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. You got to keep the main focus on the sport, don't you? I mean, we're there to aid and improve.
What's the last question that came in there? Is a high level of strength necessary before starting hypertrophy? No, but a high level of hypertrophy in terms of endurance is necessary before starting strength. Okay, so this is a really good question. So what we've shown you here is a more advanced method to achieving progressive overload with advanced level athletes. If you're not an advanced level lifter, or you don't have a big training age of 4 to 5 years structured training with someone like a strength and conditioning coach, or you need to, strength training is not the way to become stronger or fitter or improve your physical qualities. You need to spend more time on endurance-based hypertrophy work of between 8 to 12, 8 to 15 reps is where you need to spend most of your time. Because you think about, we're like pyramids, okay? And at the top of the pyramid up here is your performance. And if you want to improve your performance, push it higher, you need to build the bottom of your base of your triangle wider. And the bottom of every triangle is made up of the endurance or capacity or ability to deal with fatigue. Okay, so going back to the question, is a high level of strength necessary before starting hypertrophy? No, but you need to have endurance or a lot of hypertrophy work done before you start true strength training.
Lovely. Yeah, absolutely. That's very similar then as well when you talk about is when you go straight into your hypertrophy, you will need a certain amount of aerobic capacity to do those reps as well. So then that looks at the bottom of the pyramid for another training system as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, mate, that's all the questions that have come in. Thanks for that. It was great.
No problem at all. Very happy to do it. And if anyone is looking for more information on this or the courses, I'm sure that they can get in touch with Micheál at the end of the presentation.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Thanks very much, guys. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and chat soon.